An uninspired and anxious composer conquers writer's block by encountering a stranger with an intriguing illness. In an opera house in New York, a distressed composer, Steven Lauddem, suddenly distances himself from the crowd to find a moment of relaxation. As he glances at his watch, his wife Patricia suddenly alerts him about the arrival of Dufton Haverford, the head of the opera board. The man introduces the composer to the newest board member, Frank Hall, and then reminds him to submit the first draft of the score in 2 weeks. Upon hearing this, Steven's face reflects concern due to the tight deadline. Following the discussion, Dufton walks with Frank in the hall, revealing that the composer experienced a breakdown after his opera 5 years ago. Consequently, Steven disappeared and stopped writing music until he married Patricia, his therapist. Meanwhile, Patricia's son from her first marriage, Julian, enjoys a romantic moment with his girlfriend, Teresa Duffa. Upon her return home, the teenager shares a meal with her stepdad, Trey, who works as a stenographer, and her mom, Magdalena, a housewife looking for a job. At home, faced with a looming 2-week deadline, Steven sits at his piano, attempting to compose while his librettist, Anton, listens. However, the composer suddenly becomes dissatisfied with his current idea and wants to change it. Annoyed with the man's fickle-mindedness, the writer notifies him that he is considering an offer from Rafe Gundel, another composer. Hearing Anton's saddening news, Steven's anxiety intensifies. To distract himself, the worried man asks Patricia if they can spend a steamy night together the following day. However, his wife politely declines the request, explaining that Thursday is her designated day for cleaning. Before heading to school, Julian enters the kitchen to grab his project. As he leaves, his mom tries to share an idea for his Harvard admission essay. However, the student mentions that he's not applying to the prestigious university because he doesn't like the program. Despite Patricia's effort to convince her son to apply, he kisses her on the forehead, assuring her that he knows what he's doing. After Julian departs, Steven notices the decisiveness of his stepson about his life. The therapist then comments that her son inherited this attitude from her first husband, Douglas, an ocular surgeon. Shortly after, she excuses herself, explaining that she has to attend to a client. Meanwhile, before driving his stepdaughter Teresa to school, Trey advises her to consider St. Athanasius for college. He reasons it's closer to home, and the school will focus on producing street-smart students. However, the teen has other plans. Still devastated by Anton's sudden resignation, Steven groans from the living room as Patricia heads downstairs, prompting her to check on him. She suggests he take their dog Levi outside and engage with a stranger to help take his mind off things. Taking Patricia's advice, Steven strolls through the town, following the dog's preferred direction. As he observes the strangers, he searches for inspiration, whispering to his pet that each person carries an opera within them. Teresa and Julian discuss their project to enhance solar panel design at school. Inspired by how ants use their hairs to deflect heat in multiple directions, the students developed a material that could reduce humans' need for external cooling, such as air conditioning. Following their presentation, the teenage girl tells her partner she will love him for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, Steven ties Levi to a bench outside a bar so he can step inside for a drink. Along with his beverage, the bartender serves him some communal nuts. Suddenly, Katrina, a tugboat captain, comments that he can get hepatitis from his snack. This remark leads to an interaction, and they get to know each other, discovering that they're both breaking patterns. Steven shares his frustration with writer's block, explaining he has been composing music since at a young age. Upon hearing this, Katrina mentions that she has an illness but doesn't reveal details yet. She then invites him to the tugboat she operates, allowing him to learn more about her work. On the tugboat, the captain explains that her dad, who passed away due to an accident, built the boat, and she served as his deckhand while growing up. However, she admits that she prefers living on dry land. She then gives him a tour inside, taking him to the wheelhouse and the bedroom where she confesses her obsession with romantic experiences. Initially, Steven doesn't take it seriously, but the woman discloses that her illness is severe. She reveals that she was once arrested for stalking and had to undergo rehabilitation. Katrina then explains that she intentionally went to the bar to meet someone. Feeling awkward, the composer tries to leave, but she insists he stays for a while and prepares tea for him. As she holds his cup, the tugboat captain unzips her garment, revealing provocative clothing underneath. Upon witnessing this, Steven suddenly feels anxious but later gives in and spends a romantic time with her. Steven promptly leaves Katrina's boat after their steamy encounter. As he takes Levi home, he rants to the dog, expressing that the woman has allured him. However, while walking, a boat sound suddenly catches him off guard, causing him to tumble into the bay accidentally. Underwater, he realizes he has finally overcome his writer's block and manages to compose a beautiful opera inspired by his experience with Katrina. During the rehearsal, Steven interrupts the actress Chloe for not delivering the tugboat captain's lines as he envisioned. When the performer inquires if her character is based on a real person, he lies, telling her that he just made her up. In his explanation, the composer describes the woman as a crazed murderess who lures men to her tugboat and ends their lives. He emphasizes that despite her cruel intentions, she has a humorous and absurd way of seeing the world. The rehearsal then resumes, but Steven interrupts again when he doesn't like the performance, causing Chloe to become annoyed. Director Susan then assures the actress that she will talk to the meticulous composer. However, during their conversation, the composer only complains that the performer is not capturing his vision, which frustrates him. Hearing this, Susan advises him not to attend rehearsals so they can have more freedom with the opera, politely asking him to step outside. The next day, Patricia hires Magdalena as a cleaning lady, unaware that the woman is the mother of her son's girlfriend, Teresa. When the housekeeper asks why the therapist had a son at a young age, the therapist shares that she accidentally got pregnant in her second year of med school. Despite the challenges, she continued her education, sacrificing sleep. At the time, her parents didn't want her to have the child, leading her to move in with her grandmother, who eventually left her with the house they are in now. Suddenly, Patricia notices Magdalena's Madonna pendant and admires it. She then shares that she attended a Catholic boarding school and enjoyed peeking into the sisters' cells because they were squeaky clean. Then, she reveals her obsession with keeping things neat, describing it as spiritual cleanliness. She admits to imagining going through her clients' minds to tidy them, even during therapy sessions. As Patricia is about to leave, she receives a message from her client who cancels their sessions, prompting her to feel excited and join the housekeeper in cleaning. While they scrub the floor together, Julian and Teresa suddenly arrive. The therapist then introduces the teenage girl to the cleaning lady as her son's girlfriend. In response, Teresa reveals to Patricia that the housekeeper is her mom, leaving the therapist in silent shock. Later that day, a furious Magdalena arrives home and scolds her daughter for not informing her about having a boyfriend, leading to an argument. Teresa then explains that she loves Julian, but her mother invalidates her feelings, insisting that she's just 16 and doesn't know anything about romance. Magdalena advises her daughter to avoid distractions so that she won't end up like her, who had to stop school when she got pregnant. She emphasizes that Julian is a wealthy teenager whose parents will pay for his education. Teresa will need a scholarship, so her mother suggests she not take her relationship with him too seriously. Later that day, Patricia heads to the church to pray. At home, Steven, who had been banned from attending rehearsals, prepares himself a chocolate drink. The next day, during breakfast, Trey questions Teresa and Julian about their college plans. The teens share that they want to collaborate on environmental engineering and develop designs to solve human problems. Upon hearing their college plans, the stenographer shares that he never went to college and boasts about making more than his batchmates who did. To showcase his court reporting skills, he advises Julian to read a newspaper as fast as possible while he types. Afterward, he checks his work and informs them that he made no mistakes, impressing the student. Shortly after the stenographer's demonstration, the teens excuse themselves to leave. The couple kiss, unaware that the suspicious Trey is watching them from the window. Later, Steven walks with Levi but heads in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, Magdalena cleans Julian's room and discovers provocative pictures of her daughter. As a result, Teresa's mother returns home disappointed and informs Trey about it, who immediately comforts her and asks for Julian's age. When Magdalena informs that her daughter's boyfriend is 18, the court reporter tells her they can press charges. Upon hearing this, the woman attempts to reassure her partner, urging him not to make a big deal out of it. When she emphasizes that her daughter and Julian are in a romantic relationship, Trey mentions that he has dealt with similar cases and believes they have a significant chance of winning. That evening, Patricia and Julian watch the opera while Steven stands on the side of the stage. Unbeknownst to the composer, an emotional Katrina is among the audience, finding herself amazed by the theatrical drama. After the event, an impressed Dufton introduces Steven to his wife Maxine, who also loves the opera. When she becomes curious about the character's origin, the composer lies, revealing that the idea came to him while taking a walk. Following this, Steven's former librettist, Anton, approaches him. The man then introduces him to Rafe Gundel, the composer he works with, who is also impressed with his work. However, when the celebrated man turns around, he sees Katrina, who admits she was upset when he left her but now feels flattered upon upon realizing she is his muse. She then delivers the news that she's now based in Brooklyn, allowing her to see him more often. Upon hearing this, the composer experiences an anxiety attack and heads to the restroom to ease himself. Later, he notices a fire exit and goes there instead of facing Katrina. Meanwhile, Julian notices an ash mark on his mother's forehead, prompting her to explain that she got it from church. Then, the therapist confronts her son about his feelings regarding having his girlfriend's mother as their cleaning lady. In response, the teen honestly expresses his embarrassment but assures his mom that it won't affect his relationship with Teresa. Upon hearing this, Patricia advises her son that even though she likes his girlfriend, his brain is not fully developed yet, and his preferences might change. In his defense, the teen explains that he won't mess up his first love just because she did. When she hears this, the therapist corrects her son, explaining that she didn't mess up anything because her first husband suddenly passed away, but Julian only points out that it wouldn't have happened if his father didn't move out. Meanwhile, Katrina leaves the opera house after realizing Steven takes too long to return. Unbeknownst to her, the composer had already rushed home and locked himself in the bedroom to avoid her. Shortly after, Patricia, worried about him, arrives home with Julian. Seeing her husband in bed, she wonders why he had to run away despite his successful opera. When Steven explains that he had an anxiety attack, the therapist immediately comforts him and gives him medication. While questioning him about his emotions, she suddenly panics upon realizing the composer went to bed with his shoes on. He promptly apologizes, but his wife cools down in the restroom, where she gazes at herself in the mirror with a concerned expression. Subsequently, Patricia informs her husband of her intention to donate the house to the church when Julian attends college. She suggests they could live in a lovely apartment instead. The next day after work, the therapist heads to the church to make some donations. Once inside, she sees an ongoing program for children and volunteers to help. Afterward, she heads upstairs, sees an unoccupied room, and lies in bed. While she gazes at the ceiling, she becomes teary-eyed, realizing that her calling is to be a nun. Upon returning home, Teresa sees that Trey lined up provocative photos on the table. Immediately after, the teen admits to spending romantic moments with Julian but assures him they use protection. Suddenly, the teen hears a beep as she gathers the photos. Realizing that Trey has recorded her statement, she tries to grab the device, but he only reveals his plan to get Julian arrested. Upon arriving home, Magdalena notices her daughter's bag on the floor and immediately heads upstairs. Entering Teresa's room, the woman confesses that she was the one who showed Trey the photos because she was worried for her. In response, the furious teen explains the irreversible impact on Julian's life if he gets arrested, prompting Magdalena to promise she'll make things right. Upon learning this, Julian and his parents hire a lawyer, Harry, who explains that an arrest won't happen unless Teresa makes a statement. Though the teen is confident that his girlfriend won't do that, the attorney points out that the stenographer has evidence. Upon hearing this, Patricia becomes frustrated and pressures the legal professional to handle the situation well, especially since her son attends college. Suddenly, Steven asks if marriage is a viable solution. Harry explains that it could lessen the chances of going to trial, but emphasizes that a minor cannot be legally married in New York. After learning this information, Julian calls Teresa, and they start researching other US states. When he discovers that a minor can be married in Delaware but needs parental consent, she objects, explaining that it's impossible because she's under house arrest. They then reflect that marriage might be their only chance to avoid going to trial, but also entertain the idea of separating and finding new partners in their 30s. Despite these thoughts, Julian reassures her he will still think about her even if their marriage doesn't work out. Steven is taken aback during a stroll when Katrina suddenly appears behind him. Irritated by her stalking behavior, he finally confronts her and clarifies that she's not his muse. When she inquires about the possibility of the show without her, the composer retracts his previous statement and confirms that she was his inspiration. However, he emphasizes that their brief encounter is nothing personal. Upon hearing this, Katrina insists that she had a magical effect on Steven, highlighting that she played a role in reviving his career. The composer acknowledges this, but also suggests that she needs professional help for her obsession. Heeding his advice, the offended tugboat captain schedules a therapy session with Patricia. During their conversation, the woman discloses that she underwent rehabilitation for her illness, but it wasn't successful. The therapist then interrupts her, stating that she doesn't want to know about her past diagnosis to avoid prejudgment. After this, she inquires about her client's childhood. Katrina then reveals that she grew up in a confined space and watched numerous romantic movies, contributing to her obsession. One day, a film shooting took place at a location where she was assigned. Upon recognizing the lead actor, she believed she was destined to marry him. Because of that, she snuck into the performer's trailer and removed her clothing as she waited for him to return. However, the actor only called the cops, leading to her arrest. As a result, the court advised her to undergo rehab for her illness. As part of Katrina's treatment, the counselor prohibited her from watching romantic movies for a year. She complied, but everything changed when she came to New York for work. Suddenly, Patricia interjects and asks her about her job. Upon learning that Katrina is a tugboat captain, the therapist connects everything, realizing she's the woman behind the protagonist in Steven's opera. Her discovery immediately prompts her to go to the kitchen and put the appliances on the counter. While she does this, Steven suddenly arrives home, happily informing her that he got a commission. When the composer notices the unplugged electronics, Patricia reveals that she's donating all of them as she aspires to be a nun. She discloses that Katrina came to see her and learns that the woman profoundly loves him. Frustrated with the situation, a devastated Patricia heads to her office and tidies up her workspace, even with her client present. After her breakdown, the therapist rests in bed and a nun arrives to comfort her. Steven and Julian then head to another room to discuss what happened. The composer apologizes and informs his stepson that his marriage with his mom won't work out anymore. The teen then acknowledges the potential separation despite the horrible timing and thanks him for teaching him piano lessons and perseverance. Upon returning to the room, Patricia is awake and engaged in conversation with a nun, who advises her to contemplate her plan to join the convent for a year before making a final decision. Suddenly, Magdalena enters the room to serve a beverage, prompting the therapist to invite her to join the conversation. Julian then informs her that he and Teresa can get married in Delaware with just one parental consent, which she is willing to provide. However, the cleaning lady admits that her husband has become obsessed with the situation and might catch them because he has a lot of police friends. Upon hearing this, Steven rushes to see Katrina, thinking she could assist his stepson in leaving the state. Later, Trey picks up Teresa from school, unaware that his wife is planning something, and takes them to a 2-day history-themed camp. While the costume stenographer is distracted, Magdalena takes her daughter and meets with Steven, who helps them get to Katrina's tugboat. During dinner, Julian invites the boat captain to officiate their wedding. When she mentions that she's not ordained, he assists her in signing up online to obtain a certification. The following day before their wedding, Teresa fears they may grow up and forget who they are. In response, Julian promises her they can always remind each other about their love. Before arriving in Delaware, Steven apologizes to Katrina and admits that he wasn't prepared for her because she came out of nowhere. However, she only feels bad because she believes she ruined their marriage. The composer then assures her that it's not her fault and confesses that their first encounter brought him true happiness, leading them to share a kiss. Months after Julian and Teresa's marriage, Steven creates an opera inspired by his experience. On the day of the theatrical presentation, the composer watches alongside Katrina, indicating that they're now in a relationship. Seated next to them is Magdalena, who has divorced Trey, Julian and Teresa, a joyous couple, and Patricia, who has finally realized her dream of becoming a nun.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.